Ever feel like the world is just this tangled mess of international headlines, and you just wish you had some kind of, I don't know, conceptual GPS to figure out the why behind it all?
Yeah, it can definitely feel overwhelming.
Well, today we're diving into exactly that. We want to equip you with the fundamental lenses scholars actually use to analyze global events.
That's right. Our mission here in this deep dive is really to give you a shortcut, maybe, to being better informed. We're unlocking some powerful theoretical frameworks.
And we're drawing from an academic text, an outline of international relations, to kind of distill these ideas into practical insights for you.
Exactly. It provides a really solid foundation.
So think of it as getting a conceptual toolkit. Specifically, three distinct lenses: realism, liberalism, and constructivism.
They're big ones.
By the end, the idea is you'll be able to approach pretty much any global news item with a fresh, informed perspective, seeing not just the events on the surface, but maybe the deeper forces, the hidden currents, the underlying logic at play.
Hopefully see the bigger picture.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's get started.
Let's do it.
First up, let's pull out the realism lens. Now, this is arguably the oldest, maybe the most dominant perspective in international relations, and frankly, it often feels quite, well, realistic, especially when you look at the challenges facing the world today.
Mm-hmm. It has that intuitive feel sometimes.
Picture the international stage like a high-stakes poker game. Every player is primarily looking out for themselves. Is that a fair analogy?
That's a great analogy, actually. Realism views the international system as fundamentally anarchic.
Anarchic. So like chaos.
Well, no, not necessarily chaos. It simply means there's no overarching global authority. Think about it. No world government, no single international police force that can enforce all the rules on everyone.
Okay, so no global 9/11.
Pretty much. So states are the primary actors in this view, and they are inherently driven by a constant pursuit of power and security, precisely because they have to rely on themselves in this self-help environment.
Right. So if there's no referee, everyone's got to protect their own goal. Our source highlights a key aspect of what's called classical realism, which has this, well, rather pessimistic view of human nature.
That's a core element.
It argues that people are primarily motivated by self-interest and a desire for power. So does that mean nations are just sort of magnified versions of self-interested individuals, always trying to get ahead, always a bit suspicious of others?
Precisely. Classical realism definitely leans into that idea, that human nature, with its inherent drive for power and self-preservation, is a major driver of how states behave.
Okay.
But then you have neorealism, sometimes called structural realism. Kenneth Waltz is the big name here. And this shifts the focus slightly.
How so?
It's less about inherent human nature and more about the structure of the international system itself.
The structure. What exactly do you mean by structure there? Is it like the rules of the game board itself rather than the players' personalities?
Exactly. Think back to that poker game. It's not just about the individual player psychology, but the table itself. The number of players, how many chips everyone starts with, that kind of thing.
Okay.
Neorealism emphasizes the distribution of power among states, who has what capabilities, military, economic, etc., as the primary determinant of state behavior. It suggests that even if leaders were perfectly altruistic saints, the anarchic structure would still compel states to prioritize their own security and power.
So whether it's this sort of pessimistic view of human nature or the system structure forcing their hand, the core takeaway seems to be that states pursue their national interests.
That's the key term, yes, national interest.
Things like physical security, obviously, economic prosperity, maybe cultural influence too.
All of the above, whatever they define as vital.
And power isn't just a goal in itself, it's more like the currency you need to achieve and maintain those interests.
Exactly. Power is the means to an end.
Which then leads to this idea of a balance of power as being crucial, kind of a stabilizing mechanism.
Yes, the balance of power is a central concept. The idea is that when nations or groups of nations roughly balance each other's power, it supposedly deters any single state from trying to dominate the whole system. It creates a sort of equilibrium, however tense.
What's really insightful here, I think, is that realism helps us understand why competition, rivalries, even conflict are often seen as just inherent features of the international system, like baked into the cake.
It provides a framework for understanding that, yes.
Yeah.
It suggests that efforts to eliminate war through purely idealistic measures might often be, well, futile given these persistent power dynamics.
Sounds quite bleak in a way.
It can be perceived that way. Paradoxically, though, some realists might even argue that a strong hegemon, a single dominant power, can sometimes bring stability to the system by deterring others, even if that seems counterintuitive to our ideas of fairness.
Interesting. So for you listening, this means when you see major geopolitical rivalries, think the U.S. and China vying for influence, or maybe an arms race developing between nations, or disputes over vital resources like oil or water.
Yeah, those are classic realist scenarios.
Realism offers a pretty clear lens to understand the underlying struggles for power and security. It's about protecting yourself in what feels like a dangerous self-help world.
It's often framed less about being good and more about being secure. Survival is paramount.
Okay, so if realism paints this rather stark, self-interested picture of the global stage, you might be wondering, what about all the cooperation we see?
Right, it doesn't seem to explain everything.
What about institutions like the United Nations or countries working together on climate change? This is precisely where liberalism comes in, offering a very different and, you could say, more optimistic framework.
Definitely more optimistic.
Here's where it gets really interesting, especially if you believe in the potential power of cooperation and shared values.
Indeed. Liberalism posits that international relations aren't just about those power struggles. It champions things like individual rights, representative democracy, protecting civil liberties, seeing these as foundational principles.
Not just for how a country runs itself internally.
No, but also for building a more peaceful and prosperous international system. Crucially, it values international cooperation as a primary way to achieve shared goals and overcome common challenges.
So if realism sees states as kind of isolated billiard balls bouncing off each other,
Yeah, that's a common analogy.
liberalism sees them as potentially interconnected nodes in a network.
That's a good way to put it. Our source material details how liberalism really advocates for international cooperation through things like diplomacy, international law, and building strong international institutions.
Right. States collaborate on a huge array of issues, don't they? From trade, climate change, public health.
Absolutely, because often it's simply mutually beneficial. The theory also values tolerance and pluralism, recognizing that diversity can enrich societies rather than just divide them.
Okay, and then there's an important offshoot you mentioned earlier, economic liberalism.
Hugely important. Think Adam Smith, often called the father of modern economics. His big work, The Wealth of Nations, laid the groundwork for free market capitalism.
Right, the idea of minimal government interference leading to efficiency and prosperity.
Exactly. And what's truly insightful, connecting this to the bigger international picture, is how this extends globally. The argument is that economic interdependence created through free trade and investment can act as a kind of golden straitjacket.
A golden straitjacket.
Yeah, it makes war potentially too costly to contemplate, even for rivals, because everyone benefits from stable commerce, stable supply chains, access to markets. Disrupting that hurts everyone, including yourself.
That's a powerful idea, that shared prosperity can actually bind nations together, acting as a force for peace.
It's a central tenet of liberal thought on international relations.
The source also mentions John Locke, often called the father of liberalism more broadly. He emphasized natural rights, life, liberty, property, and this radical idea back then that governments get their legitimacy from the consent of the governed.
Foundational ideas, absolutely.
How do those deep philosophical principles translate into how states should act on the global stage, according to liberalism?
Well, they lay the moral and philosophical groundwork. If individuals have inherent rights, then states arguably have responsibilities to respect those rights, not just internally, but ideally in their dealings with other states too.
Okay.
And if a government's legitimacy comes from its people, that encourages it to seek peaceful, consensual interactions with other legitimate governments. It fosters the belief, a key liberal idea, that democratic states are inherently more peaceful, at least with each other. The democratic peace theory.
Right, I've heard of that. But this raises an important question then. If realism suggests it's all ultimately about self-interested power, why do states bother with these huge international organizations like the UN or the World Trade Organization? What's really in it for them beyond maybe a momentary tactical advantage?
That's a fair challenge, and liberalism provides compelling answers. It highlights that states have shared interests that genuinely transcend borders. Think about global pandemics.
Yeah, very relevant.
Or financial crises, or climate change. These are challenges no single state, no matter how powerful, can solve alone.
Makes sense.
So institutions provide the frameworks, the rules, the forums for cooperation. They help reduce uncertainty, lower the costs of working together. They help states realize that sometimes collective action and pursuing mutual benefit are actually the most rational paths, even for their own long-term self-interest.
So it's not pure altruism, it's enlightened self-interest sometimes.
Often, yes. It aligns self-interest with collective good.
Okay. So when you see countries coming together for climate agreements or collaborating on global health initiatives like vaccine distribution or even just working through the WTO to mediate a complex trade dispute,
Yep.
liberalism helps you understand that underlying drive for collective action, for mutual benefit. It's built on shared values, perhaps, but also very much on the framework provided by international institutions.
It's about building bridges, establishing rules of the road, not just building fortresses.
All right. Now, for a perspective that really makes you think differently about how we maybe create our world, not just react to it,
Yeah.
This is constructivism.
This one really shifts the ground, yeah.
If realism gives us this stark map of power struggles and liberalism offers a kind of compass for cooperation, constructivism asks us to consider if we can actually redraw the map itself through our ideas.
Absolutely. Constructivism fundamentally challenges the idea that there's a single objective reality out there that dictates everything.
Okay.
It posits that reality is not objective and pre-given, but is actively constructed by individuals and communities through their experiences, interactions, and interpretations.
Sounds a bit philosophical. Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about something as basic as money, a dollar bill, or a euro coin. It's just paper or metal, right? It only has value because we all agree it does. Its value is entirely socially constructed.
Ah, I see. We collectively believe in it.
Exactly. So in international relations, constructivism argues that things like ideas, norms, identities, these are incredibly powerful forces that shape how states behave just as much, or maybe even more than, material power.
So it's not just about material power like tanks and bombs or economic incentives. It's about what states believe.
Yes. The source emphasizes the focus on shared beliefs and norms and how they influence state actions. It highlights that states' identities, how they see themselves, how they see others, are socially constructed.
And that identity then influences their behavior.
Precisely. It views the international system as dynamic. Norms aren't fixed. They can evolve over time. Think about how attitudes towards slavery or colonialism or chemical weapons have changed.
Okay, so if anarchy is what states make of it, like the theory suggests, does that mean if everyone suddenly decided war was totally unacceptable and pointless, it would just disappear?
Well, in a highly simplified sense, the logic follows that path. Though obviously, changing deeply embedded norms like the acceptability of war is incredibly difficult and complex.
Sure, of course.
But the core point is that the meaning of anarchy isn't fixed. It's shaped by our shared understandings. If states view each other primarily as rivals, like in a realist world, then anarchy means a dangerous free-for-all, constant suspicion. But if they start to view each other as partners, maybe sharing common values or facing common threats, like in a more liberal view, then anarchy becomes simply an arena for cooperation, for building institutions. The structure itself hasn't changed, but its meaning has.
And what's really fascinating here, you mentioned, unlike realism and liberalism, which focus heavily on states, constructivism brings in other actors.
Yes, crucially, it acknowledges the agency of non-state actors. Think about NGOs like Amnesty International or Greenpeace or advocacy groups campaigning for human rights or environmental protection, even international scientific communities establishing norms.
How do they shape things?
They work to promote certain ideas and norms. A shared idea like the illegitimacy of using child soldiers or the scientific consensus on climate change can actually gain traction and change how states behave. Sometimes this goes beyond calculations of pure military might or immediate economic incentives. It changes what's seen as legitimate or appropriate behavior.
That's a profound shift in thinking. The source mentions a prominent figure, Alexander Wendt.
Yes, very influential.
He famously challenged traditional realist assumptions, arguing that state behavior is shaped by social structures, norms, and shared beliefs, not just by material power. He really pushed that idea that anarchy is what states make of it.
He really did. He brought the social dimension, the power of ideas, right into the heart of international relations theory.
So he's essentially saying that our perceptions create the world we live in a fundamental sense.
In a very real sense, yes. Connecting this to the bigger picture, constructivism shows that international relations aren't just about what states have, material power or what they do, cooperate or conflict. It's also crucially about what they think, what they believe, and how they perceive themselves and others. Their identity matters.
And this explains how norms like human rights or environmental protection gain traction.
Exactly. It helps explain how these ideas can evolve and eventually alter what states even perceive as being in their national interest. What was once considered purely an internal matter or just an externality nobody worried about can become a shared international concern that demands state action because the norms have shifted.
So when you observe the evolution of global norms, say around issues like human rights, gender equality, maybe the responsible use of cyber technology, or even this sort of increasing taboo against the use of nuclear weapons, constructivism helps us understand how these profound shifts in shared understanding and identity actually happen, and how they influence policy and behavior across the whole international system.
It offers a lens for understanding change and the possibility of progress, because ideas themselves can change.
Right. It gives us some hope, maybe, that the world isn't just stuck in one mode.
It allows for that possibility, definitely.
Okay. So we've covered realism, liberalism, and constructivism. What does this all mean for you listening at home, trying to be well-informed and make sense of the daily deluge of news?
Well, the crucial thing is that these three theories aren't mutually exclusive. It's not like you have to pick one and declare it the absolute truth.
Right. They're not competing teams.
Not necessarily. Nor is one inherently better than another. They offer different, often complementary lenses to view the same global events. Think of them as different magnifications or filters for your mental microscope when looking at the world.
Okay, different tools in the toolkit.
Exactly. Realism helps explain the raw power struggles, the security dilemmas, that constant competition. Liberalism highlights the opportunities and the mechanisms for cooperation, for institution building, the collaboration aspect.
And constructivism.
And constructivism reveals the underlying beliefs, the ideas, the identities that shape everything. It shows how norms evolve and sometimes even redefine what states perceive as their national interest. You could call it the culture of the international system.
Okay, let's try to make this concrete. Imagine looking at a complex, unfolding global crisis. Let's say a regional conflict erupts over a disputed territory, and it's creating a refugee crisis. And there's an international debate about whether to intervene for humanitarian reasons. How would these lenses help you decipher that mess?
Okay, good example. Let's break it down.
A realist looking at that situation, what would they likely focus on?
A realist would probably zero in on this as a classic struggle. For territory, for resources, maybe strategic advantage between the warring sides. They'd be looking at the military capabilities of each side, the alliances they're forming or might form, and how the big neighboring powers are reacting to protect their own national security interests in the region.
And the humanitarian crisis, the refugees.
To a strict realist, that might be seen as, well, tragic consequence, but secondary to the hard power calculations. Unless it directly impacts a state's power or security, it might not be the primary focus.
Okay, stark but clear. Now, what about a liberal perspective?
A liberal theorist would likely immediately focus on the breakdown of international law or perhaps existing treaties that were supposed to govern territorial disputes like this. They'd highlight the failure of diplomacy.
Right.
They'd look at the role or maybe the failure of international organization like the UN Security Council in trying to mediate. They'd probably advocate for new institutional frameworks or collective security measures to try and restore peace.
And the refugees.
They would absolutely emphasize the shared responsibility of the international community to address the refugee crisis. They'd point to international norms and laws regarding refugees and the need for humanitarian aid coordinated through international bodies. It's a collective problem demanding a collective solution.
Okay. And finally, the constructivist lens. How would that approach it?
A constructivist would delve into the deeper narratives. They'd ask, what are the historical grievances? What are the competing national identities that are fueling this territorial dispute? How have shared beliefs about sovereignty or self-determination, or maybe past historical injustices, shaped how the countries involved perceive the situation and each other?
So looking at the underlying ideas and identities.
Exactly. They might also ask, how are the international norms around humanitarian intervention evolving? Is there a shared understanding developing that allows or maybe even compels external powers to act? Or Conversely, is the norm of non-interference still the dominant one in this specific context?
Interesting.
They'd even look at how the conflict is being talked about, the language used, the symbols, the stories being told by each side, and how that shapes public opinion and ultimately policy choices.
Wow. Okay, so you can really see how each theory provides a different piece of the puzzle.
Absolutely. And using them together leads to a much richer, much more comprehensive understanding than relying on any single perspective alone could offer.
We've really just scratched the surface of these incredibly rich theoretical frameworks today. But hopefully, you now feel like you have a more powerful toolkit to analyze the world around you, to go beyond just the headlines and really start understanding the why behind global events.
Understanding these frameworks truly enhances your ability to think critically about complex global affairs and encourages you to question assumptions, to consider multiple viewpoints, which is just absolutely essential in our interconnected world today.
So next time you hear about an international crisis or a new global agreement being signed, or even just shifting alliances between countries, pause for a moment and consider which of these theoretical lenses, realism, liberalism, or constructivism, might offer the most compelling explanation for what's happening right now.
Try looking at it through each lens in turn.
And maybe, even more provocatively, how might a subtle shift in global norms, or perhaps a change in how a nation perceives its own identity, actually be more impactful on the long-term international landscape than a very visible change in military hardware or economic policy?
That's a great question. Something to chew on.